the future, I don't know. At least what we are doing goes in line with the general, let's say, search for understanding. And I don't see why we should kind of, pretend that we're better than them. We don't have the vision of the future. They don't have it. Everyone is looking for some kind of breakthrough in it.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Not easy, not easy.
Well, my personal judgment is that, well, it might be a bit peculiar, but from the history of, I don't know, 50 years or even more, for Russia, the best, it's not a deal, but a kind of understanding has been reached usually between the conservative people here and the Republicans in the United States.
Yes.
And Russia is definitely oriented, let's say, at this, this is the way of thinking. So if some kind of international activities stimulated from here, they could come through Azerbaijan or through, I don't know, France or whatever, or Austria. But usually they are stipulated when people are waiting for some changes in the big administration there in over the ocean. That's my, I mean, I've been studying the history also, because meanwhile, we have all the problems.
Now, Mr. Kulikov, I want to see if I can share screen. Can I share screen? Ah, yes, yes, no problem.
Yes, we have a nice lady helping to us today, and she is the moderator, and she is much better than myself in
yeah, here it is.
No all this. Her name is Marina. You can see her, Marina Kachan.
So okay, so I see here, and one second, extend.
Oh, Marina, здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте. Hello, dear colleague.
Hello, Marina. And you are recording the presentation, so you have all the slides and everything. Is that right?
No, I don't have the slides, but you can show and start your demonstration of your screen.
Но запись все равно идет, да?
Да, запись идет.
No. So the recording is made, but then we can exchange the texts for publicating them in a single compendium.
Okay. I can send the slides. I have the slides. I can send the slides later if you want.
Okay.
Sure. We have some communication here, so just either to Marina or to me, it's the same.
Very well, very well. So how many more people you are expecting?
At least 3 or 4. Combe should join us from India, and hopefully Gonchek will join us from, I think she's in Portugal, and Jens is in Berlin, and Sasha also wanted to join, and Andrei Kartunov, so, well, quite a number of people. I see a nice lady whom I don't know. I'm sorry, my name is Vladimir. And
who? The Anyang.
Anyang, I'm sorry, I haven't introduced myself.
So, where are you from, Anyang?
Hello. I'm from China. My name, I'm in the speaking list for China.
Very nice.
From Beijing or Shanghai?
I'm in Shanghai right now.
Oh, great. We've been there sometimes, even together with Walter once.
Very nice.
Right.
Jens.
Thank you for the invitation.
Oh, it's Walter's. I mean, he's the head. We're just people around. Gwendolyn is here.
Hello, all. Vladimir, Walter.
Hello.
Can
So,
you hear
Glenn,
me?
yeah, where are you?
Hello,
where are you
everybody.
also? Where are you now?
I am now in Vienna, Italy.
In Berlin.
I moved from Bad Ischl to Vienna,
Oh, that's nice.
but I will be back in Bad Ischl soon because I'm a member of the local tennis club.
Uh-huh.
And what about Walter? Walter is he joined the Zoom meeting, but I don't know if he's connected now.
Let me write him an email.
Here he is. Yes. Hi, Walter.
Hi, Yossi. How are you?
Shalom. Shalom.
Shalom.
Hi, Walter.
Hi, Jens.
Yeah, you can all imagine that I'm talking to you from the shelter.
Oh,
Oh,
yes. You're in a
Can
very
hardly
difficult
imagine.
situation nowadays.
Yeah, it's really craziness that shooting again from Gaza and back to Gaza and killing here, killing there, craziness.
Incredible.
And at the end, it's the same situation. Yeah? Nothing has changed
Nothing.
except
Maybe,
dozens of people have died.
maybe next week we will have a new government, so maybe there will be a change. Maybe.
I knew the father of Lapid very well.
Very nice person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His father came from Vienna.
His father was Hungarian, I think, no?
Maybe originally, but it is not so easy in our region. Remember, Teddy Kollek was always recognized as a Viennese, but he was born in Hungary.
Yes.
But in the German-speaking part of Hungary at the time.
I understand.
Okay, good. We have still 4 minutes, yeah. And Yossi, you see the chances for a new government?
Yes, today all the indications are that Mansour Abbas, the Arab members of parliament, will support the government. And once he supports the government, then there is a government. And he announced today, earlier today, despite the tension and the violence and everything, he assured that he is going to support the government. He continues the negotiation.
I see, okay. That's good news.
Yes.
Home is trying to connect himself. Hopefully he will succeed.
Hallo Walter, servus.
Servus, Wendelin. Regarding your wish, Wendelin, to dictate in English.
Yes, if you want it.
I will get an answer in about 1 week.
Okay.
Because the lady I have in mind is still abroad who will return to Vienna.
In case anyone is interested in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I have seen there is an interest.
I've already read about The Son of Austerlitz by Tolstoy. Because a French friend sent it to me.
Who is talking? Wendelin?
Me, yes.
Where are you calling from? Italy?
No. I'm now in Vienna.
Also in Vienna.
And a few days from now, the lockdown will be lifted. So we can go to, Walter can invite you to the Sacher, Hotel Sacher again. The Sacher Torte, in case you come to Vienna.
But then he has to bring me a good falafel. So I have some problems with the screen. I don't know why.
But I hope
Everybody
you
still
can see
there?
us.
Nothing good. You were asking for to be the first one.
I asked to be the first one.
Андрей, привет.
О, привет, Володь.
Я курю, поэтому скрылся.
Понятно. Но я здесь в любом случае.
Спасибо большое.
Yossi, I will have to ask Ching Wen. Would you agree that Yossi Shevel starts and you come afterwards?
Yes, all right.
It's all right for you. Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
your kindness.
Thank you. Thank you.
What time is in Shanghai now? It's, I think, 8 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, it's yeah, 8 o'clock almost.
8 o'clock, yeah.
Oh, Gonchik.
Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Madame Tasmini.
Yes, that's right.
Hello, hello, welcome.
Where
you very
are you
much.
from now?
I'm right now in Lisbon.
Okay.
Yeah. But I'm based in London, but during the pandemic, I've been here with my family and just waiting for things to calm down a bit before I return to the UK. Yeah.
I think it's a good place to survive.
It is,
the pandemic.
absolutely. I'm not complaining.
Yeah. I think it's much better to be in Portugal than in
Absolutely.
England at the time.
I agree with you.
So we have 2 o'clock. Can we start now?
Okay.
Okay. Welcome to everybody. I hope everybody who was there last week is attending us today again. And the newcomers, Mr. Smini, we just had on the screen, and Ching Wen Guo from China. So this time, the gender question is better solved than last time. This should be kept as a good example for future events. I expect an interesting debate again, and I will make some conclusions afterwards. Now I give the floor to Yossi Shevel, who comes from Israel, from the Galil, this is the northern part of Israel, where he leads the Galilee International Management Institute, a very renowned academic institution with many connections all over the world and with a great experience in Africa. And to my extent, we should deal much more with Africa. In my view, the 21st century, at the end, we will not be able to prove that, but at the end, I think the 21st century will be the African century. So, Yossi, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So shalom, I say shalom and good afternoon, everyone. It's 3 o'clock in Israel. It's really fantastic that here in probably midday in Lisbon and 8 o'clock in the evening in Shanghai, and here we are all together. And so I prepared, yes, as Walter said, Galilee Institute has been working and cooperating with African countries for more than 30 years. We have already 25,000 alumni in Africa. So what I want to show you, I prepared a presentation, and then I will run with the presentation about Africa and about what I think is going to happen in Africa and the effect over to Europe. So I want to start immediately by showing you that in 1964, Kenya and China and India were pretty much at the same socio-economic level. This is 1964. Look what happened to Kenya until today, and what happened to China and India, that both of them went up. The same is here, not only Kenya, Zambia and Zimbabwe. This is in 1960, where China and India were here, and 2009, China is here, India is here, Kenya is in the same place from socioeconomic level, Zambia is going down, and Zimbabwe is really disappearing. And so really what happened is that education was developed in the other two, and education is really the most powerful weapon which you can change the world. And this is, who said it? Nelson Mandela, and he was right. But if we check in Africa, what is the recommendation to invest in education? If we are talking about the future, so 4 to 5%, this is the recommendation of Dakar Declaration. But if we look at the map here in Africa, most of the countries, especially here is Nigeria, less than 1% is allocated to education. And we at Galilee Institute, we talk about education for so many years, because here, for example, the Minister of Education of Kenya is alumni of our, he studied here in Israel at our institute, and also the Minister of Education in Tanzania, and the same with Ghana. But here, look at this. This is the number of universities by continent. Here we have Europe. This is the number of universities, and it's still going up. You see, 2015, 2016, 17, 18 is going up. Africa is down here. Africa is such a poor appearance, poor. So what we do at Galilee, we are trying to establish joint universities. For example, this is a Ghanaian Israeli medical school in the north of Ghana. So the first three, just as an example, that I want afterward to show you that this is what Europe should do. The first 3 years are there, but the fifth year is in Israeli hospitals. The students come here and they study here at Israeli hospitals. Here we signed the agreement. This is the Israeli ambassador to Ghana. And the same thing is Ethiopia, that we signed with Public Health Institute, and also in Uganda. She is the Minister of Health of Uganda, and she is the alumni of our institute. She studied here at 2011. And now we are establishing in Tanzania also a new Tanzanian Israeli medical school with a joint faculty and clinical years in Israel. We also work with WHO, World Health Organization, throughout the whole world, because the Israeli health system, we share the experience in Israel. And I think you know that now we almost forgot about Corona. It seems like it's all behind us. The whole country is open. Why? Because of the health system. And this is why we do it jointly with WHO, the World Health Organization, and this was in Haiti. Now, a few words about Africa and climate change. And Africa, look at this, from the year 1900 until today, or 2000, the temperature went up 1 full degree, 1 full degree. And because of that, you have the Sahel. This is the Sahel, south of the Sahara. The Sahel is moving south, and you have more and more deserts. And here, this is the north of Kenya. Already 40% of all the livestock died because of dryness, lack of water. And here, this is the desert. Desert is really nothing grows. We participated in a study, this is back a few years back, in East Africa. You can see here Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, and you see this is Lake Victoria. Now Lake Victoria is the source of water not only of East Africa, but also Egypt. Egypt and Sudan are based on Lake Victoria, and Lake Victoria is shrinking. And I want to show you Lake Chad. Lake Chad in the middle of the Sahara. Listen, middle of the Sahara. This is in 1972. The size of Lake Chad was 20,000 square kilometers. And today it's totally dry, totally dry. There is no water in the middle of the Sahara. And the same with Lake Victoria. Look at this. This is every 10 years, 1970, 1980, 1990. The red is the amount, the number of population, the size of population around the lake. And today, in 2015, already more than 30 million, 30 million people. And of course, the lake is shrinking. And look at this. This is the change in length of growing period in agriculture because of climate change. And you have here in Nigeria, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, between 50 to 113 fewer days of growing period. A real disaster. Not only there, you have also disasters because of climate change. Here, look at this, the flash floods, and in Burundi, and these are in Rwanda and places like that. On top of everything, Walter, there is a deforestation. They cut trees. Look at this. In the world, the average is 31% that is covered by trees. In Sweden, 69%. In Africa, the average is 23%. 23, it used to be almost maybe 90%. In Uganda, only 15%. In Kenya, only 6%. In Ethiopia, it's 3%, and they still cut trees. And those trees that remain, look at them. On the left, this is before climate change, and this is because of climate change. Now, climate change also reduced the amount of water. And here, look at this. This is here in the long lines here, the navy blue or whatever, and this is in 1990, and the short ones are in 2025. So here, Cote d'Ivoire, #1, they had this amount of water, but in 4 years from now, in 2025, they will have less than half. And all those countries, here is Ghana, half, Nigeria, half, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, all of them, here, Djibouti, no more water at all, no more water. And I visited in Kenya, here, this is my wife and I, we visited Tana River. He is the governor of the province. It's called Tana River. He studied at Galilee, and then he invited me. And we saw this is the biggest river in Kenya, Tana River. And the water is going into the ocean. It's going into the ocean. And the people shout, we don't have water. They even start fighting over water. And we saw some casualties, but the water is there. It's only a matter of water management. And some people had to go from one place to another. And this is in the south of Kenya, under Mountain Kilimanjaro, the water, Mzima Springs it's called, and the water is going into the ocean. Only 10% of the water is going into Mombasa. So here in 2018, they had a Blue Economy Conference with 20,000 people from all around the world talking about the problem of water. And I was one of the 5 keynote speakers. I came to talk about water. Now, please look at it. This is here, the areas at most risk from climate change. You see this chain? This is the area of most risk from climate change. What do we have here? We have here Boko Haram in the northeast of Nigeria. Darfur is here. The Somalia is here. Shabab in northeast Kenya is here. Shabab also here in Mozambique. So maybe all those problems of terror and Boko Haram is because of climate change. And now I want to remind you that in Syria, today everybody understands and everybody agrees that the main reason for the civil war, 10 years of civil war and more than 500,000 casualties is because of lack of water. Because there were before 2010, there were 3 years, dry years, no rain. Also, the Turks put dams on the rivers and there was no water. So the farmers could not continue farming their farms. They moved to the cities because they looked for employment. They did not find employment, so they started robbery and they started crime and things like that. This is how it all started. And I want to tell Europeans, this is what is going to happen in Africa. And I'll show you in a minute and I will convince you. And by the way, there are estimates that by 2030, 9 years from now, there will be civil wars in Africa because of climate change, because of lack of water. And the question is whether or not there is a solution. And I say, of course there is a solution. The solution is reuse of water. Now, did you know that in Israel, we reuse 90% of our water? 90%. You know, when we reach 100%, then we don't need any more water. Can you imagine? Then here it's written 87%, but today is 90%. Number two is Spain with 17%. Here, Italy, 8%. US, Europe, 5%. But this is the solution for Africa, reuse of water. And if we do it in Israel, we can do it also in Africa. And this is what we teach. Here, agriculture, all the agriculture in Israel, or most of the agriculture in Israel is water by reuse water. Not to mention also the dripping system was developed in Israel, that this dripping system, it's more and more efficient. It makes it all. And here, the desert in Israel is turned into this is a garden. Look at this. You can see here the mountains, really desert. Look at this. These are cherry tomatoes in the desert. Even wine they make in the desert, not to mention lemon with no seeds. Oranges in the desert, so we can also do it in the Sahara. This is the new agriculture. And indeed, this is a group that came from Kenya. North of Kenya is desert. As I said, the Sahel is going down. They came to Galilee. They were here in March 2020. This was the last group that came to our institute just before Corona. Just before Corona. And indeed here I'm talking to
the entire problem of Africa is water, and Israel has the solution.
Who is talking now? Okay, this is the president of Kenya that I had dinner with him and I explained about water, and indeed we signed an agreement. This was November 2016, but we already signed again and again. And here, this is in the north part of Kenya, totally desert. So they brought 10 experts from this, it's called Turkana State. They brought it here, we met them and also designed with them a plan how to turn it to a garden. If we do it in Israel, we can do it also there. And we did the same thing with Uganda. This is the Prime Minister of Uganda. We signed an agreement here, the government of Uganda, Galilee International Management Institute. We signed here is the Minister of Finance. And also this is, look, the border between Zimbabwe and Namibia. Namibia is a desert and the desert is moving into Zimbabwe. So we developed here on the left, he is the Vice Chancellor, the President of Midland State University. He studied at Galilee. So we designed a program for 9 months on water management, how to stop the desert. This is the only way. And 6 weeks out of that, and this is also north of Nigeria. Kano State is the biggest state in Nigeria, Kano State. And this is, we signed an agreement, Kano State government. This is a desert on, of course, water management. Now agriculture, look at this. Israeli dairy industry is the most advanced in the world. 50 liters of milk per day. So we are doing the same thing in Africa. For example, here we signed an agreement in Kenya, and this is a university. They established a farm, dairy farm. They teach all the farmers, and in 1 year, all the farmers doubled the amount of milk from the same cows and the same equipment. Here we signed also in the north, Samburu, in the north of Kenya, and especially with now I want one word about post-harvest. Did you know that one-third, they say 1/3 of the agricultural production in Africa never never reaches the market, is lost, totally lost. Here, 1.3 billion tons, and never reaches the market. Already the harvest is very low. So can you imagine, even here, the FAO, Food and Agriculture of the United Nations, they said that 1/3 never reaches the market. But in fact, as I said, it's 50%. 50% of the crop never reaches the market. But is this what? It's written in the Bible? No, it's a matter of know-how. Here we have long shelf life, and we teach part of it how to lower the loss, how to lower post-harvest. And the last thing that I want to say is about alternative energy. You know, Africa is full of sun. Now, I don't know if you know that in Israel, in every roof, you cannot get a permit to your house if you don't have solar energy on your roof. And this is in the sea already, that you have solar panel, and this is in the desert. In the middle of the desert in Israel, we have this called Ashelim, and you have thousands of mirrors that they get the energy from the sun, they broadcast to this, you see this, thousands of degrees, and can you imagine what we do with this is a city for 120,000 people, enough electricity for the city, which is also lacking in Africa. Another thing is national security. We, Galilee Institute, we are involved. This is a piece, but what I wanted to show you is, I will skip this. If I have time, I'll go back to this. This is in Nigeria. And I also, although I'm talking about Africa, but we have one Chinese participant, I want to show you that we sign agreements also with China. And every 5 years, this is the third time that already we signed agreement with the government of China. He is the Deputy Minister of Science and Technology of China that comes here and we signed the agreement. What is it? On innovation in agriculture, know-how in agriculture, how to double the production, how to triple the production. And now I'm getting to the most important point. There are 31 what is called high fertility countries in the world. 29 of them are in Africa. Also, the population is aging in Africa. Between 1950 to 2013, only 9% were old people. Today, or by 2050, already almost 20%. Now, please look at this. In 1950, there were 230 million people in Africa. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, there were already 1.2 billion. 1.2 billion. In 2050, there will be 2.4 billion. And here, 2100, there will be 4 billion people in Africa. Look, there were only 9% of the population of the world, 16%, 25%, almost 40%. Walter, 40% of the world population in the year 2100 will be in Africa. Now look at this. Nigeria is going to be 900 million people in 2100. 900 million people. And in by the way, Tanzania, 276. DRC, Congo, Ethiopia, even Uganda, small Uganda, 200 million people. Look at this. This is Nigeria in the year 2050. 2050 is only, what, 30 years from now? There are going to be more than 400 million people. So what is the main risk? The main risk, because agriculture is not productive, because of post-harvest, they will not be able to continue cultivate their land. They will move to the cities. Already the cities are overpopulated. Look at this. In 1950, only 5% of Africans lived in cities. In 2050, almost 50%. And look at this map. Here you have Lagos. Lagos, the biggest city in Nigeria. In 2010, Lagos was only 10 million people only. But in 2050, there will be 40 million people. 40 million people. Kinshasa, there will be 30 million people. Cairo, 23, 24, Dar es Salaam, 20 million people. Today, or rather in 2010, there were only 3 million people. There will be 20 million people. Where will they go? Where will they go? With no water, no agriculture, they will start going up north to Europe. They will start going to Europe. Look what happened in Syria. I mentioned already the civil war. Here, because of climate change, because of agriculture, lack of water, population explosion, for sure, they will start going to Europe. Look what happened with 3 million refugees that Europe shaked. And politically, I don't know, so many things happen, even the Brexit, they said it's partly. But here, millions will start marching up north and they will cross the Mediterranean. Can you imagine? So what can we do in order to minimize? Today, we have to do it today. So in 2030, when there is war, and in 2040 and 2050, they will not march to Europe. We have to develop efficient agriculture. And this is possible. This is my message. It is possible. Because if we do it in Israel, we can do it also in Africa. We do it also in China. We work also with the OAS, Organization of American States for Latin America. We share the experience of Israel in agriculture and especially on water. Here, look at this. It is so inefficient that 60% of the total employment, but it's only 33% of GDP. Here, look at this. Here, this is the annual growth rate. Here, Nigeria is 1.2% compared with Brazil, Indonesia, Malaysia, 3% per year. And here you can see low fertilizer of utilization, only 13 kilo per hectare in Nigeria. In the world is 100, Asia 150. Mechanization, nothing, 10 tractors compared to 241 in Indonesia. Here is the low utilization of improved seeds, only 5% compared to Asia, 60%. And irrigation, nothing, less than 1% in Nigeria compared to 28% in Thailand. But there is potential here. Look at this, there are potential. You have a lot of water. Only 40% of the arable land in Nigeria is utilized. Can you imagine? Only 40%. And here you have youth. And if we teach them that agriculture today is not like as their grandparents plowing, but today it's digital agriculture. Can you imagine Nigeria with 220 million people already, they can feed all of West Africa. But today they import wheat, rice, sugar, and fish. They are near the. Again, the main risk, as I said already, is that they will move to the cities, that the farmers will not be able to continue cultivate their land. And already the cities are choked. And what we have to do together, and there are excellent European universities like Wageningen in Holland in agriculture and others that they can teach in Africa and they can allocate funds to do it. And this is in the sake, really in the sake of Europe. In fact, what we did, we have programs to double the agricultural production.
You should come to an end.
And I just want to show you that this is through training, only through training and education. And we do it in agribusiness, in dairy, horticulture, poultry, fishery, post-harvest, of course, and irrigation, water and irrigation. Here, the crop production and farm, poultry, aquaculture, the oceans, of course, dairy farming and post-harvest to reduce the loss, agribusiness to be able to, and fruit, Africa is full of fruit and full of flowers. So what can we do? Just to summarize, first of all, I think it is possible. It's not, should not sit down and wait and then be surprised suddenly that we have so many refugees, because they will come. And we can double the agricultural production, either on a national level or a county level. We reuse of water, of course. Reuse of water, maybe this is the most important thing. preparation for disasters. You know, the World Bank issued a study that usually the damage is 200 million US dollars. But if we prepare it well, we can reduce it to only 40 million. Only 40 million. Of course, solar energy is a must. Is a must because really oil is diminishing, and of course training and education is the most important thing, and especially the young. It's a very young continent. We have to train them, and now we can train online. The online is also in Africa. So here we have, for example, just to give you one example, is a new online that we developed on digital agriculture, really to upgrade the youth, and we are committed to employ 10% of the graduating. This is the 2-year program, and afterwards we will accept 10% of the students in Israeli high-tech firms, and the same for health, digital health. We're going to start it in Nigeria, hopefully next month, both agriculture and digital. By the way, Israel is, I think, now considered to be #1 in the world nowadays in terms of vaccination, is because of our digital health. My personal physician, the primary health care, when he takes my card and he sees the file is, and if I, God forbid, I go to a hospital, whatever, my file is totally computerized, everything is in there. So again, it is possible. If we want to prevent another crisis of like we had with Syria, so this is the time now to educate Africans, to teach them, to train them, to turn Africa, and Africa can be really the basket of the whole world. So thank you very much, and shalom.
Thank you, Yossi. Toda rabba. You drew a very interesting picture. On the one hand, dramatic situation. People are dying from the lack of water, aging wars. On the other hand, you have shown that solutions are possible. I fully understand your advertisement for the Galilee Management Institute, but you cannot do the homework. So what are the lessons you would recommend to Europe? What should and what Europe has to do in regard to Africa?
So first of all, I think that if Europeans, the European leadership, will recognize that this is a real need, and this is also a threat to Europe. So this is it, to educate, to train the Africans, and mainly to train them in Africa. Look, in Nigeria, 47,000 young Nigerians are moving to Europe and to the US to study, especially 17,000 are going to UK universities, and you know, they pay a lot, and most of them never come back. So there is also the drain brain. And instead, teach them where they are. Teach them in agriculture. Look, the farmers, they want to stay. They don't want to be refugees. They prefer to continue working in their farms, but they don't have water. So they move out. But if we teach them, reuse of water, by the way, we are doing it now in India. You should know in India, besides the problem now of COVID-19, there are every year 13,000 farmers that commit suicide. They take loans, they buy seeds, and because there is no rain, or sometimes there is too much rain, they commit suicide. But we are in the 21st century. Agriculture today is not agriculture of the 19th century or even the 20th century that you plant the seeds and then you pray for God to have rain. No, you can reuse water and irrigate, plan your irrigation. And now in agriculture, everything is computerized. So even the irrigation is computerized. The fertigation, the fertilizers through the irrigation is computerized. The temperature in the greenhouse is computerized. Everything is computerized. So you don't depend anymore on rain. This is what we have to teach them. And I hope that leaders in Europe understand that this is also that they have to help, because we all help the developing world, but this time is also for the future of Europe, not only because of philanthropies or things like that. You have to do it, and it is possible.
Thank you, Yossi. Any questions to Yossi Shevel?
Walter, I would like to ask a question. Wendelin.
Please go on.
Yeah?
Wendelin.
Yes, please. Thank you very much, Joseph. That was most interesting, most interesting. I've always been interested in Africa and mostly follow the events on French media. And the French naturally report a lot about the fight against terror in the Sahel zone. So my question to you would be, how do you see this fight and how successful was it? Or how successful is this fight against terror in Africa?
Okay, so first of all, I must tell you that we, Galilee Institute, we were, and Walter knows it, we were involved in the peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia, because the Minister of Defense of Eritrea, Ephraim Sebhat, and the Minister of Defense of Ethiopia, Lema, both of them studied at our institute. So we developed a peace plan and submitted to the Prime Minister, to the two governments, and they signed the agreement. You know, the Prime Minister, Ahmed, he received the Nobel Prize. I must tell you that they forgot Galilee Institute when they gave him the Nobel Peace Prize, but at least we contributed to the peace. Now we did the same thing in Nigeria. Boko Haram, now it's exactly 10 years that Boko Haram, since Boko Haram started killing and kidnapping and raping and everything, 10 years. And nothing happened, nothing happened. They wanted to turn this state, it's a Borno state, the name is Borno State in the northeast of Nigeria. They wanted to turn it to an Islamic state, nothing happened. So we proposed to the government of Nigeria, the head of the DIA, DIA is the Defense Intelligence Agency of Nigeria. You can say it's the Nigerian CIA. And the director of DIA is also, he studied here, so we know him, Mr. Usman. We submitted a plan that Boko Haram, we proposed to Boko Haram to lay down the weapon, and in return, the government of Nigeria will give them a piece of land, 10,000 square kilometers, and we are willing, Galilee Institute, we are willing to contribute by teaching them the most advanced agriculture and water management. And really, this is in the making. They, Mr. Usman, the director, he received the peace plan and moved it. By the way, we were also involved in a similar program in the south of Nigeria. In the south of Nigeria, you know, whenever they found some oil, they took all the farmers and threw them away. So all the farmers started to fight back. They stole oil, but they also kidnapped and killed and this and this and this. Finally, the government of Nigeria, this is with the previous president, Jonathan Goodluck, he proposed to them to give them piece of land, and we trained them in agriculture and water management, how to be a successful farmer. And this was jointly with Amnesty International, and it worked. It worked. You don't hear of any kidnapping in south of Nigeria. You only hear now in the north. So the same with Mali and Chad, and we have alumni from all those countries, and Niger, all those terror that I think that look, what are these terrors? Terrors are because they are so poor. So but if you come with a solution and they really appreciate this solution, you can talk to them. Even here in Israel, I hope that the Israeli government will start talking to the Hamas. I'm sure all of you saw that the Hamas is shooting and Israel is shooting back, and they shoot and they kill, which is crazy. It's for nothing. We have to find a political solution. So also for terror, there are solutions, and we are ready to contribute to turn those places in the middle of the desert to flourishing gardens.
Thank you very much. Most interesting.
May
Thank you.
I?
Yes.
You know, I have, well, thank you for a very, I think, very rich and very optimistic presentation. But I have two questions which you can call devil's advocate questions. The first is related to the African education, specifically to the African higher education. I had some experience working with the leading African universities, and I think that my experience suggests that even if bright and ambitious Africans get their education inside the continent, they are tempted to go abroad for employment. Maybe in agriculture it is different, but if you take engineering, if you take medicine.
Ein bisschen später mit dir reden. Ich bin gerade auf einer Konferenz hier vom MDU.
Someone is. If you talk about law, my assessment is that at least 40% of best graduates still prefer to go abroad. Even in social science, I know many scholars from Africa who study African problems, but they prefer to study these problems sitting in European think tanks and in American universities. Again, you know, I don't want to make a judgment on that, but I wonder whether, you know, more investment into African universities might help to change this trend towards more people trying to get out of their countries and to seek opportunities abroad. And my second question, which is related to the first one, but which is more general. You spoke about agriculture, you spoke about education, you spoke about energy, and it's great to have demonstration projects like the ones that your institute pursues in Africa. But if we take a sectoral approach, these are very capital intensive areas. Agriculture is extremely capital intensive these days. Green economy is not inexpensive either. And that applies to all ingredients of any modernization plans for African countries. I recall that a couple of months ago, Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Guterres, made a speech at the Mandela Memorial Lecture. And from his speech, it was clear that the deficit only in education, the annual deficit of least developed countries, most of which are in Africa, of course, amounts to approximately $1 trillion. $1 trillion. And if you add to the bill agriculture and the Green Revolution and some other important ingredients of successful modernization, of course, the price tag is likely to be much higher than that. So the question is where the money should come from, because there is no money in Africa of this scale.
Yes.
And it's also clear that it would be extremely difficult to resolve the current African debt crisis, because this crisis is already quite large, and I think that we might see defaults on these debts in many African countries. But even if we assume that we will see a major debt restructuring affecting African countries, first of all, it is not something which can automatically include private lenders. I think that they will be very unhappy about that, and they will resist fiercely. But if somehow we twist their arms, and even if all the debts of African countries are going to be written off, which is unlikely, but in theory it can happen, I think that will mean that major lenders will have no appetite for continue funding African countries. Because if you don't really have credible reasons to believe that you can get your money back with some interest, I think that even the International Monetary Fund is not going to give money, especially if we are talking about, if not trillions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars, which Africa needs every year, not in every decade, but every year. So my question is, if we need a global redistribution of wealth from the rich south to the poor, for the rich north to the poor south, if we need to provide for this redistribution, how it can be done without some kind of very, I would say, rude, illiberal, authoritarian ways of doing that. Or, if we don't do that, then can this money, can these funds be generated inside the African continent, which I doubt very much, because the major source of revenue that Africa has right now is tourism and energy export. And both sectors are declining. Tourism is declining because of the coronavirus pandemic, and energy will decline because of the green revolution in the north. So frankly, I think Africa is losing the sources of income it used to rely on. And there is no clear substitution. You are talking about agriculture, but again, you know better than I do how difficult it is to penetrate European agricultural markets. Even for Israel, it is very difficult. It is much more difficult for African countries to do that. If you are talking about tourism, again, we don't know when the tourist industry recovers completely, and to what extent African countries can benefit from this renewed tourism. Sorry for being so long, but I think that these are very important issues that should not escape our attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. Very interesting questions. Yossi?
Yeah, can I reply?
Please try to be as short as possible. Yeah.
Okay, as short as possible. So first question was about the universities. So I believe that the fact that European universities market their programs and they try to market and to achieve. Look, in the UK, the fastest growing export sector is higher education. Universities make a lot of money, and they convince African students, not only Africans, but also African students, we're talking about Africa, to come and study in the UK, and then most of them, as we know, no, they don't go back. So this is what we do, and I hope that also European universities will understand that instead of just recruiting students to come to the UK or to France from the Francophone countries, and to Germany and Hungary and all those countries, Poland, if they establish partnership with African universities, this is the way that, and now look, in the past, Mr. Andrei, in the past, we had to send professors to go to Africa. Not everybody wanted to go to stay in Abuja for 6 months, but today we can teach by online. So it makes it much easier to develop cooperation between African universities and European universities. Now, if European universities, or let's say European governments, will understand that this is a must, because you're talking about the future of Europe, not the future of Africa, but so maybe they will encourage universities to establish partnership, to teach in Africa. By online, you can have the best lecturers teaching in Africa. So this is the way. And the problem, as I said, the problem from this brain drain is these marketing approaches of European universities that are trying to recruit students, the best students, and they never go back. Now the second question, Walter, I'll be brief. We witness now, for example, negotiation between. First of all, I agree. What you said, agree. They say we have to invest more and more. The rich community, you have to invest more and more in Africa. And unfortunately, also Africa is corrupted. There is a lot of corruption. Part of the money never reaches the farmers. It goes to pockets of those leaders and things like that. But here, for example, now, Sudan just turned to become let's say a new country, if you want, new regime, more democratic. So the World Bank is now negotiating with the new government, and for $2 billion, but they have several steps. So, they have to be more democratic. They don't get a check for $2 billion, but they get the money in installments, and every installment it depends on achieving the goal. They agree on goal. Education, Here, this is where we are, because the World Bank also talked to us. The vice president of the World Bank East Africa wrote to me, they want us to be part of the whole thing, especially on training in education and in the agriculture and water management, to be part of this, the whole assistance. And the same with South Sudan. They start now discussing with South Sudan again. So there is a way. It's not just writing a check, sending a check, and you are right. If you send a check, nothing will happen. It will be, and next year they will demand another check. But with a plan, with installments, you have stages, and you have to reach this stage, and to reach a goal. This is the way, and African countries can depart, take off together with the North. And as I said, I believe that for Europe today is a must. Europe, European leaders must understand that this is a fortune of Europe. This is the future of Europe. It's not just for Africa. Also, it's for Africa, and we don't forget the colonial times and things like that. You owe them, don't owe them. But this is the future for the safe future of Europe.
Thank you very much, Yossi. All the best for you.
Thank you.
Good return to Israel from the cyberspace.
Yes, I'll go back to the shelter.
I wish Israel and Palestine to cut this current situation and to return to peaceful solutions.
Okay, so I have to say shalom, Walter. I apologize that I cannot stay, but I hope that afterwards we'll get the summary of all the lectures.
Do you agree that we distribute your PowerPoint?
Okay, so shalom, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Shalom. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Yossi. Now we come to the next speaker. It's quite interesting that we now talk about China, because there are some parallel situations to Africa. 100 years ago in China, millions of people died for the lack of food. There were civil wars, and now we can raise a question like, is China the next hegemon? And I'm glad to welcome Jingwen Guo, who is Chinese. She has experience in China as well as in Europe. She is alumnus of the famous Danube University in Krems, in a course which was led by our friend Johannes Merck, and I was myself a lecturer in her course. So I'm eager to listen to Jingwen. Jingwen, you have the floor.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I have just raised my hand to ask to discuss something with Yossi about Africa, but you didn't count my. Okay, I'll lower my hand now. And yeah, I think we know about the African problems, and Chinese government is also trying to help about the situation. From what I know, that they export a lot of fertilizer as well to Africa to try to help with agriculture. I had a conversation with a person from Ministry of Science and Technology in China. And yeah, the problem of fertilizer that sometimes it also destroy the earth. So they are working hard to for developing ingredient for biofertilizer. And we know that Africa has a problem of holding their skilled, educated human resource. We have a lot of African students in Chinese universities. And most of them, after studying, they choose to stay. And yeah, I have African neighbors as well. Yeah, I think yeah, there are a lot of it's a comprehensive problem. And yeah, last year, 2020, the Chinese write off a lot of debt for African countries, but this is it's just temporary. For the Africans to deal with the problem, they need better management. And I think what we can do as Chinese or as European is very limited. Yeah, thank you again for UC about your excellent speech. And now I will move on my part. Yeah, I got this title not long ago, and I will also put on a share screen. Where is it? Oh, here. Share screen of a short presentation of mine.
Yeah, it's on the screen.
Oh, okay, okay. Find it. Yeah, I got this theme. The title today is called Europe Facing a New Hegemon China. And yeah, I will read from my my short notes. I hope it's okay for you.
Yes.
Yeah, Europe facing a new hegemon, China. This is an interesting moment to talk about EU-China relationship. As everybody knows, recently, European Union has imposed a sanction against China on human rights issues in Xinjiang region. Then China imposed the sanction back on 10 people and 4 entities, which supposed to be involved in making the first sanction. And afterwards, the ratification of EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment is suspended. And under this background, I'm asked for giving a speech on EU-China relationship. When I first got this title, Europe Facing a New Hegemon China, I was a little puzzled for a while. It reminded me of a band naming Imagine Dragons. Could China really be the world hegemon, or is it just a superfluous worry? Let's take a look at this question. First of all, does China have the capability to become the hegemon? Nowadays, the world multipolarization is developing towards more complex directions. The system of one superpower with many strong power is being gradually deformed. It is still clear which countries will eventually become the poles yet. Everyone is trying their best to ensure its position in this process. Multi-level and various forms of cooperation and competitions are unfolding and changing all the time. And in the meanwhile, there are more economics rising and enhancing their comprehensive national strength. It is unrealistic to become the hegemon in such an environment, while the rise of the rest leaves no room for hegemon. China has economic success, which is true, but it takes much more to become a hegemon. Chinese government always advocates common development and opposes hegemony. I think they must have made their decisions based on detailed analysis and came to a conclusion that they could not dominate others. Second, does China have the motivation to be the world hegemon? In the last 40 years, China did make an enormous economic development. It lifted 770 million people out of poverty. From 1982 to 2011, China's average growth rate is over 10% per year. Since 2012, the economic growth slowed down and stayed at around 7% per year. The Chinese government calls it new normal, which means yet slower but steady growth. In 2019, China's GDP reached 14.36 trillion US dollar, but GDP per capita is only 10,261 US dollar, which is only 1/6 of America's. Yes, only 16% of the average income here is only 16% of the American income. So no matter how large the economy is, China is still a developing country. It has many problems as other developing countries have. Big gap between the rich and the poor, regional development imbalance, improper economic structure, etc. Therefore, the focus of Chinese government is to solve its domestic problems and seek for sustainable development. They are too busy with themselves and won't have the time, money, and energy to pursue hegemony. The reality is that China still needs many years of hard working to reach its aim of being a modern country. The most important tasks of Chinese government right now are to increase income for farmers, narrowing the development gap between urban and rural areas, increase the number of middle class, improve social welfare, promoting equality and rule of law. So sustainability is the key. It is not necessary to strive for the first place, but it should be long-lasting. Only such development model can guarantee the long-term prosperity of Chinese people and stability of the society. As German professor Dr. Horst Loher put it, China is not pursuing more stable and sustainable development than simply pursuing growth. Since May 1985, agreement on trade and economic cooperation between European Economic Community and the People's Republic of China has come into effect. China and the European countries have carried out cooperations in the fields of industrial mining, agricultural processing, science and technology, energy, transportation, environmental protection, including fight against the climate change, and corporations in third countries, etc. According to the statistics released by Eurostat, EU trade reached 586 billion euro in 2020, which is 31 billion euro more than that of the United States. Despite the pandemic, EU exports to China increased by 2.2%, and the imports from China went up to 5.6%. On the contrary, the blocks made with the US, the blocks trade with the US has significantly shrunk. In 2020, the EU's exports to the United States is declined by 8.2%, and imports declined by 13.2%. Brexit has exacerbated the economic gap between the EU and the US, further consolidated the leading position of the United States in the global economy. The EU 27, which has lost the UK, not only faced the problem of financial shortage, but also significantly declined their influence on the global economy. In this case, Chinese market would be the most important pillar of global revenue for European business. The United States remains as EU's largest political ally, but China is EU's biggest business partner. Just not long ago, German Chancellor Angela Merkel urged the Western global powers to include China in their multilateral system and treat Beijing equally, rather than freeze it out and risk slipping into a Cold War style bipolar order. Xi and President Emmanuel Macron had also talked about the importance of strategic autonomy on their policy towards China during a Franco-German Defense and Security Council video conference. Even though they could not completely break away from the agreement with the United States and could not completely distance themselves from this consensus with the United States, it is still inconceivable to separate from China as Washington proposed decoupling, especially in the digital era. It is not a good idea. Decoupling from China will directly harm the interests of Europe and EU member states. We should know that China is the only G20 country with GDP growth right now during the pandemic. By the end of 2020, China's domestic consumption has almost recovered and have effectively combated the pandemic crisis. And the economy has rapid growth again. I would think it is very helpful for EU to maintain close partnership with China, at least during the COVID-19, if it's not longer. And also the post-COVID recovery period to go through the difficult time together. According to a survey conducted in 2020 by European Union Chamber of Commerce in China, the pandemic situation has not shaken the confidence of European enterprises in investing in China. 89% of the enterprises interviewed are willing to stay in China, and 3/3 of the enterprises interviewed list China as the top 3 place, one of the top 3 places of investment. Many European enterprises are willing to continue to increase investment in China, and many Chinese enterprises have also expressed their willingness to increase investment in Europe. And yeah, so, but however, take a look at the present situation, which the suspension of the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. Okay, I turn off the share screen. 1 second. And 1 second. Where's the screen? I think I just lost the Zoom somewhere.
Well,
I don't know how to get it back.
Vladimir, can you help?
It might be some arrow on the top in the left. So asking to go back.
Okay, let me see.
You mean this arrow?
Stop sharing.
Oh, you're back.
Okay, I find it. Okay. Oh, okay. So I find it. Yeah, right now, the suspension of the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment has obviously poured cold water on these companies. And so how should the EU face China? Maybe we could think of this question more objectively. it won't be a bad idea if EU could think it over more carefully and take an independent standpoint. I believe that peace and development is still the theme of the world today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, any questions?
Thank you very much, Jingwen. It was an interesting presentation, and I like the way you dealt with the question whether China is a new hegemon, and described that the priority in Chinese policy is sustainability. And I have to say, it's really fantastic how fast China recovered from the pandemic and returned to economic growth. And partnership with Europe can help both sides, I think. Are there any questions to Jingwen? Yeah,
Can I? Yeah, thank you. Very interesting. Thank you very much. As far as I follow the discussion, there's always one question: is there a common EU policy towards China or not? So my question would be, how do you consider the EU compared to different EU countries? Do you make distinctions between the approach they show towards China, or do you really think there is a unified approach as far as Brussels is concerned and its policies towards China?
Your question is about how China sees the relation with EU and the EU member states, right?
Yes, yes. If you think that's a unified policy, or do you think there are many different policies?
Well, right now, I think the European Union has a very strong tendency to work together strongly, especially during the pandemic. They need to cooperate within themselves, and they are unifying more stronger than ever before. And China always have a good relationship with most of the East European countries, and yeah, I think the Chinese government will continue to work very closely with them and try to increase cooperations between the East European countries. But as EU as a whole right now is getting stronger, and also there are laws that every member states has to follow, yeah, China is at least the Chinese government is taking a very high concern of EU Parliament. Yeah, with the political, as I said, the investment agreement is very important. The Chinese has fight for it for many years, and also they give up some benefit for Chinese side to negotiate it. And the 2020 is finally get settled. Most of the countries signed, and after, yeah, you know that the superpower have influenced, and Chinese and the EU, American EU policy came in on the way, and they decided to stop it. The European side has decided to stop it, and I think it's not really a good idea. I work in I always work in this international field. I'm working in an Irish company also for which has business in China, and right now I see some problems also goes into the minds of individual people in Europe. Yeah.
Okay.
So-
the second,
so it's
yeah.
Yeah, it's
The second
not
panelist
only
question.
it's
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you.
so it's not only a EU attitude. It's also influence their states, their member states, and influence entity other and influence. Okay, is it all right?
Yeah, okay. For example, I was wondering the Road and Belt Initiative of China seems to be aimed at individual states, not at the cooperation with the European Union as such. Am I mistaken?
Yeah. Yeah, the Belt and Road Initiative is economic cooperation, and it's for Chinese to on this China-Europe train, and it link many countries, individual countries, and for the for transportation of goods, for helping the trade to go more efficient in the exchange of resource, and this initiative was not welcomed so much by some countries in Europe, and Chinese government worked more closely with this, some individual states, as you say.
Okay. Any more
But
questions?
this, yeah.
Any other?
Actually, this the initiative is a big circle. It doesn't only include Europe. It also includes Central Asia, and also it has a sea pass of which works close together with the Southeast countries. It's more a global economic cooperation, which is advocated by Chinese government. Everybody is welcome to join it. It will, China didn't mean to exclude anyone, but there was some in the beginning when it started. EU was not so friendly towards it, and it's not about China want to exclude EU. It's more the other way around.
Okay.
Walter, I wonder, may I have a question to you on China or any other European participant to this event? May I?
Yes, please.
My question is related to the EU-China investment agreement, which was signed on the eve of the New Year holiday last year. You know, sometimes here we get an impression that the process of its ratification within the European Union is slowing down, and that some of EU leaders argue that this agreement has to be renegotiated, that the European Union should load it with additional preconditions related to human rights or to some limitations on Chinese investment. in the European infrastructure. Allegedly, the Biden administration exercises certain pressure in order to slow down this process as well. And that it's not likely that the deal will be completed in the immediate future. So my question is whether it is right or wrong, and whether we can consider the agreement to be a done deal, or Europeans are still considering what kind of additional clauses or preconditions they should include into this agreement. Thank you.
Well, I hope it's a done deal. Right now, it looks like they are following some strategy, which yeah, you know, I hope this agreement will continue, and there's some difficulty right now. Some parliament members are strictly against it in Europe, and I don't really want to talk about the human rights issue, which was everywhere in the public, but I think I have to answer your question. I don't want to go to detail, but I have researched about this Xinjiang problem, and part of the report was the credibility of that research is questionable, and the famous German scholar, so-called scholar Andreasen, I think, which is included in this Chinese sanction, and he is a very right-wing extremist, and he worked. I have looked it up that he worked quite close and was financed by another country. So it's more political. This is not a pure human rights issue. It's really a political game. And also about this institute, which is publishing a lot of the so-called research about the Xinjiang problem, the human rights problem, is also not really academical. It's not like what is advertises itself, and it's not neutral. And they also they also work with some governments, and they used to publish that they used to mislead people, and the problem is many Europeans didn't really look closely and didn't go to Xinjiang to check it out. And they also just believe in mass media.
Is it difficult to go to Xinjiang or not?
I mean, the institute which which is publishing a lot of things about the Xinjiang human rights issue. It also used to publish many articles and evidence which says Iraq employed weapons of mass destruction. How credibility it could be, it's questionable. And I don't want. I think that's it.
Any other questions? Not the case, then thank you very much, Qingwen. It was very nice to have you here. You will stay, of course, until the end of the conference, if it's not too late in Shanghai already. Thank you. Now I come to the next speaker, it's with Jens Wendland professor in Berlin as well as in Moscow, expert on media. And when we ask about global media, Jens told me he will have also a special view on China. So Jens, you have the floor.
Dear Walter, dear colleagues, I hope you understand me, you hear me. Is that okay?
Good quality.
Yes, it's a little difficult because I may interrupt now the portraits of continent and subcontinent affairs, and my subject is seems a little abstract, but you will see I will try to give a scenario about the fact that we are all involved in it, in the development of media. And in a way, the title of my remarks should actually be changed into Europe and the global digitization, mass media digitization. And media seems in the development too narrow, given to the development of communication and the effects of it. And the term digitization establishes the connection to what we heard to China. China plays a prominent role in my subject too. The original title, Media, is reminiscent of a bygone era. It calls to mind the primacy of a Western-oriented media world. It was once the exportable model of civil society that conveyed the people in print and broadcast and ruled alongside legislation and jurisdiction as a corrective of politics, yes, as a kind of fourth power in the society, and it promised to enlighten about public affairs. The importance expanded, the original importance expanded with the opening of the civil internet. 1994 was the key date. The freedom of the media and the communication suddenly seemed limitless. But for that time being in the dimensions of freedom, commerce, and the technical superiority of the media society USA, and I too was fixated on this American dream, had in my head McLuhan's "The Medium is the Message," culminating in the global village, filled with the startups of Silicon Valley, from which the big four, from Apple via Facebook to Microsoft, have evolved to the most valuable addresses of the new digital world economy. A few years ago, the New York Times hosted a discussion on the political path to digitization. The effect. Globalizing wisely was the question. The discussion proceeded according to a familiar pattern. Everyone agreed that the future digital global world would recover from the American being. My guest contribution with reference to alternative multipolar models, for instance, to the BRICS, was dismissed as obsolete, typically European. For too long, especially in Europe, the culturally influenced notion has persisted that digitization is just a continuation of traditional media with new technical means and the convenience of the digital economy. With the onset of the digital age, this tenet has become obsolete. The world of media is changing fundamentally. Traditional instruments such as newspapers or broadcasts are caught in the unstoppable pull of digitization, are losing their shape and their future. The old daily newspaper may be maintained as a business model for another decade. The advertising markets are shifting to the internet. Radio and television are increasingly switching to streaming services, Netflix as an example, and they lose their stand-only positions. The main drivers of this development are social media, which lead from the mediated to the excited public. The consumer of media becomes an actor. The professional journalistic work is influenced by that. A concrete example quoted by the American political scientist Yasha Monk comments on the current situation, the effect of the corona pandemic on the work of media. He said, infodemia is being spurred on by the mutants of information in social media. A new generation has been dominating the newsroom. It is shaped by the willingness to get excited on social media. In this respect, the New York Times is not managed by editor-in-chief Dean Beckett, nor by publisher Arthur Sulzberger, but by Twitter. The digital New York Times now has nearly 7 million subscribers. To illustrate the fundamental global change in media production and use, two highlights, this time from Russia and from the perspective of the student generation. Social networks are used by 61.2% compared with radio, television, and newspapers by 24.7%. This following personal statement of the situation is probably representative for the generation. A student said, I feel a big discomfort when I do not have my mobile in my hands. Without mobile, I'm like without my hands. I feel dependent on it. And I could survive without newspapers, radio and TV, but not without mobile phones. The quoted student has everything in one hand with this intangible smartphone. The saying, to have something in your hand, means that you have power over something or over someone. And those, for instance, in political power can digitally control, direct, format, and offer services. The first thing that comes to my mind is the model of Chinese smart cities. And in old Europe, the contrast, the pessimistic vision that comes to mind is George Orwell's 1984, the surveillance state. An essential political conviction of the 20th century was that democracy and a flourishing social market economy belong together. The freest countries in the world were almost among the richest. In short, the more democratic, the wealthier. This narrative is also out of date. In China, another formula for success is emerging that is based on two components: the productive and explosive mixture of authoritarian governance and the digital capitalistic economy. The digital architecture of China rises from a growing technical superiority, increasing influence on the international markets, and the possibilities of political control. That is why it is often said today, the digital presence is media in California, but the digital future is created in China. One thing is remarkable: the global competition of digital systems is in full swing, and it's influencing the whole constitution of states and nations. The limitless freedom of the internet is being replaced by the struggle between national systems, in which China's economy and politics play a particularly dynamic role. I too am far from seeing China as a hegemon, also in the case of global digitization, but in setting the tone in a process. Global competition initially leads to isolation, other than the original idea. The global internet is nationalized. This has been law in Russia since 2019. China has long since created its own order of digital platforms that completely mirror the American ones from Amazon to Facebook. The nationalizing and isolation has several reasons. I may remark two main factors. These are, on the one hand, the political control of one's own society, and on the other hand, national security. We have long been in a multifaceted cyber war. Just one economically striking example, in 2020, 1 year ago, cyber criminals, hackers, and digital snipers caused damage of around $1,000 billion worldwide, and the trend is rising. This cyber war has long since become a means of international politics to exercise political influence, disruption of public national infrastructure, such as supply systems, in the end to actual war-like strategies. You hear every day about it. Digitization and global competition will lead to a digitally determined geopolitical new world order. The American influence was formative for a long time. China implements its digital strategies in economic export, not only to Africa, but also in models that are effective worldwide. You mentioned it, such as the new Silk Road, One Belt, One Road, which is inconceivable without digital architecture. Another blanket statement, Internet is becoming Asian, can be seen blankly from its usage. China has, in comparison, 904 and the US 312 million Internet users. But the competition of digital systems between China and the USA must not be the model for the future. The development also has a multipolar chance. Therefore, I think it's not the question of hegemon digitally. For example, in the construction of the BRICS, or furthermore, in the recently concluded RCEP trade agreement. This agreement stands for Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, includes 10 other Asian states in addition to China, and covers trade, services, investments, e-commerce, telecommunications, and copyrights. This partnership can also promote multipolar-oriented digital systems and strategies. Let's not forget that India has long been one of the most innovative nations alongside Silicon Valley when it comes to technology and programming. But where is now the new relationship to Europe? Europe still depends on traditional media preferences, has viewed digitally, missed a lot, is very busy with itself. That was the question of the colleague Kortunov to Walter, I think. But it is trying, it is perhaps breaking slowly away from the old US dominance in internet and digital norms, standards, but trying not to become even more dependent on China. EU tries, on the one hand, to profile a sort of industrial policy, on the other hand, to promote the drivers of digitalization. A special commitment is made to the promotion of artificial intelligence efforts, as well as to encourage the chip industry. A contract with India is intended to form an opposite pole to China's dominance, but most of these projects are not even in the pipeline, and in the roadmap of global strategies of digitization, the EU ranks, I must say, as an emerging country. My last remark within this interruption, what can our institute, what can IISES contribute to this discussion? Some speakers rightly raised this question last Wednesday. In this context, reference has been made to the work of the World Public Forum. I personally remember the development of the idea of establishing a digital dialogue of civilizations, a 10 years work in workshops and panels and roles, afterwards in the Berlin DOC Institute. The focus of this idea was to contribute to the discussion of factors of the digital society of soft skills, which are treated far too casually, to scientifically accompany the multipolar future of digitization, to rise intercultural understanding, digital ethics. IISES could take the part of a bridge which leads from the qualifications and values of civil society to the digital global future. I hope more and more people will, on one way, understand the importance and the position of digitization, and on the other hand, to establish and to discuss intercultural questions. Thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Sorry, I didn't switch on my microphone. Thank you much, Jens, for your very interesting presentation, which brought to us a very complex thing in an understandable way. I now understand digitalization a little bit more, not complete. When you talked about the student who said he cannot live without his smartphone, you added that the smartphone gives them so much power, but is not also the case that there's power upon the smartphone? Sometimes I feel as a slave of my smartphone.
Yes, I think it's a question of generation.
Yeah.
My son, for instance, my youngest son, doesn't need TV and newspapers, and he works only with electronic instruments like laptop and iPhone. And if you have one unique instrument, you can influence many things of service, of thinking, of steering. And that's I think the entrance for a total digital future. And one thing is you have an architecture to steer reality, to steer your thinking, you steer the events. And that's, I think, a very underestimated position or development in many things of awareness. And I think what I started, I think it's very much a question for the next generation. That's right.
But when you said young people don't need any more newspaper, don't need any more TV, but there's still a hunger for information. They're totally dependent from communication channels like Facebook, which is also a very easy way to distribute fake news, as we could see during the pandemic.
At the beginning, you said it's a very complex subject and to discuss. That's right. But you see the changing from information from the traditional leading instruments and media to a very powerful mass media of those who can not only receive information, but they can produce information, and for totally new communities. And one community, if a community has the possibility to, and the power to influence the minds and the awareness, I think then you have the political dimension. and then you have the total political dimension. And what I mentioned was, for instance, the instruments of cyber war. You can read every day about the attacks, for instance, in political systems, in systems of supply and service public. And that is, I think, a new quality of information, of producing and of using information.
And how do you see Europe in comparison with other big players in the US or China?
Yes, I said one key one key information is that in the roadmap of this global development of digitization, the EU ranks as an emerging country.
Yeah.
On one side, very much looking on traditional media situation, and on the other hand, very slowly growing to a digital unit, far away unit. And the EU is maybe a driver. It may be a driver. They try to support programs for artificial intelligence. They are networking in international contracts, for international contracts, but it's only at the moment only a promise and not reality.
Any other questions?
Yes, Walter, could I ask one question? Thank you. Thank you very much for your extremely interesting information. What I would like to ask is this interdependence, this influence you mentioned of Twitter concerning the New York Times, for example. I read the New York Times quite often, and my impression is that the editors have a very clear strategy. They have a very clear editorial strategy concerning, for example, the crusade against Donald Trump, or now the crusade against Russia. So my impression has always been and is that this opinion of the editors and journalists, they are very much themselves responsible for it. And I do not quite see the influence Twitter has upon this phenomenon.
I think I should give two answers. I try two answers. The first answer is New York Times is traditionally an institution with strong journalistic, I think, self-consciousness and standards. But it's, you know, that more and more journalists leave New York Times. There's a struggle within the editorial staff. And it's going more and more to, I think, information patterns of the digital era. And therefore, I think there's a little path to Twitter. And New York Times has to also to accompany the use of the new generation. And on the whole, they are very effective and successful. I said, now they have, it's unthinkable in normal traditional frames, they have 7 million who are quoting for New York Times in the internet.
Okay.
No, what I wanted to say is that more and more you could compare the New York Times to Pravda. I think the multitude of opinions in the New York Times matches to what you could follow in former times in Soviet newspapers. And that's, for me, that was very, very surprising.
I see.
There's no more multitude of opinions in the New York Times. That's I dare to say.
There's one development, a very sad development, is the mainstream development, because
Absolutely.
Yes, that, and you are right. And the mainstream development has to do with the influence of the prosumed influence via internet. I think that's more and more. That's in development. And I'm a journalist, have been a journalist for 50 years. And I must say, for me, it's a very sad development, because you lose traditional journalistic standards. For instance, you have to look for more sources before you publish, or you should make deep research, whereas deep research cannot maintain versus the very fast information flood of internet and of internet informations. That's a very, for me, a sad, but not to, I think, not to correct the not to correct development.
Okay, thank you much, Jens. I have to give the floor to the next speaker, because we are very short in time already. Now I call upon Comte de Carpentier.
Oh,
yeah, sorry.
I have something to say. Is it okay? Yeah, talking about the digital competition. Yeah, I think China is a big player. That's true, but the American is still holding the upper hand, and they are playing sometimes not so fairly against the Chinese companies. Everybody knows that 4 years ago that Huawei's CFO was in the detention by the Canadian government, and then transferred to the US, and she's still not back yet. It's well, I think America. What do you think of? Yeah. What do Jean's?
You raised your question already. Thank you. We are short in time. Jens, can you
I think I know what you mean, or what you want to ask. On one hand, you have a struggle with about details and political tendencies with under the influence of internet. That's one thing. Between Russia, China, Europe, every day you read it. But the most important is the struggle for the future of internet, for the infrastructure. And there's one thing you may remember, that's the fight to establish 5G from Huawei, from China, into other states. That's the struggle about the infrastructure of internet. And it's, in a way, it has the tendencies to behavior like war. But on the other hand, it's the question of security, of influence of markets and political influence. That's right. You cannot avoid.
Okay, thank you. So now we go to the next session, and I call upon Comte de Carpentier to talk about Europe and India.
Thank you, Mr. Schwimmer, and good evening to all. I'm speaking from New Delhi, and unfortunately, I don't seem to be able to switch on my camera, so I will only speak, on audio, because for some reason it doesn't work on this particular chat. So I will try to be as concise as possible. I'm supposed to deal with India from the perspective of the European Union, and even more so the European Union from the perspective of India. I would like to say first that India is now going through a very major health crisis, which has been widely reported and which was quite unexpected, because the last year saw a first wave of the COVID-19 contagion, which was actually quite relatively mild in India and which was dealt with quite aptly by the Indian medical system as insufficient as it may be. However, this new wave, a sort of double mutation of the virus, has caught the country by surprise at the time when, of course, many restrictions had been lifted and had to be promptly reimposed. So what I'm driving at from this perspective is that India's growth story has been considerably slowed down, and last year there was, of course, a fall in the GDP. This year, the GDP was expected to grow by 12%, which would have been an absolute record for India, but we now do not know what the figures will be, because we don't know how long it will take for this particular wave to subside. Now, regarding India and the EU, many comparisons have been made, and they are often superficial. The fact that India is 2.5 times as big as the EU population-wise, the fact that the EU has 27 states and that India has 29 states, and many of the states in India are bigger population-wise than the biggest EU states. All that led to some optimistic perspectives about natural brothers in arms, if I may say so, or at least brothers in peace. However, there have been problems, even though the EU became fairly enough a strategic partner of India. India established relations with the European community soon after its creation. And by the time the 5th India-EU summit was held, a strategic partnership was struck, and it progressed through yearly ministerial level meetings. And one of the ambitious projects undertaken was a free trade agreement, which was proposed in 2007. But which was negotiated without much success until it was stopped in 2013 for reasons of economic divergences. India being keen to protect its small and medium sector from foreign competition, and the EU insisting on, for example, introducing its large food, essentially its supermarket distribution system for merchandising, which India found quite potentially detrimental to its own interests. There were other problems, but I will not go into them because that would take too long. There have been also some hurdles on other fronts. For example, with regard to the nuclear industry. As you know, George W. Bush Jr. Was very intent on exempting India from the nuclear proliferation group's restrictions, since India never signed the non-proliferation treaty, considering it discriminatory. George Bush decided that since the US wanted India to become a stronger country and potentially a rival to China, he was very keen to lift that restraint, which had essentially deprived India of some vital supplies in the civilian nuclear field. And some European countries opposed it on the grounds that India had not demonstrated that it required such an exemption, which could then be given to others. Of course, there were countries like Pakistan which strongly objected, saying that if India got that, then Pakistan should also get it. This has to do, of course, with the fact that there was no clear separation between the Indian civilian and the military nuclear sectors. This separation was achieved, however, and as a result of that, India was able to, with the support of the United States, essentially get out of what you might call the non-recognized nuclear ghetto. Now, this, however, it led to some improvement in the relations between India and the US. And in fact, there has been even more optimistic talk about India and the US being very convergent in their foreign policy interests and in their economic trajectories. In particular, the US has been floating the concept of Indo-Pacific instead of Asia-Pacific to include the Indian Ocean, in which India is central, into the wider sphere of what we might call American cum Western influence, or superiority, which, however, of course, was understood not quite in the same way by the various partners in the discussion. The US expects India to become, through a series of military cooperation agreements, to become, as it were, a partner of the US in this region of the Indian Ocean, where the US already has a military base at Diego Garcia and is also very strongly positioned in the Gulf. On the other hand, India is very insistent that its territorial rights, its exclusive economic zone over the Indian Ocean should be respected, and that because of its size and history, it should also be regarded as the primus inter pares in the Indian Ocean region, and should be able to observe neutrality in a concert of, in a discussion, in a sort of continuous dialogue with other countries in the region. As we all know, India has been, for quite a few decades, interested in creating a regional economic community, which has historical precedents because in large part, it is what's called Greater India under the British colonial administration, because such countries as Burma, Maldives, Pakistan, of course, Bangladesh, and even Sri Lanka were part of the British Empire. Therefore, India, by being sectioned into various countries, lost some of that subcontinental unity, and was always interested in reviving it in an economic cooperation format. However, the rivalry that remains very strong between India and Pakistan has made that largely impossible, simply because Pakistan has always wanted to be seen as a sort of co-equal of India, and therefore would not agree, because of the larger size of India, to take second place. And therefore, there has been this issue which has to do with territorial disputes, but also with an overall, let's put it this way, national ego perspective. Now, this has become further complicated by the increasingly close association between Pakistan, first with the United States back in the 1950s, when it became part of a series of American military pacts, some of which might have potentially been seen as being anti-Indian. And the second, and of course, in the second phase of this process, we have seen China and Pakistan becoming ever closer partners, which has also made India very suspicious of the potential of having to wage a two-front war, or even if there is no military confrontation, of having to deal with a hostile Pakistan allied with China, with which India has, as we all know, some serious disputes and differences about territorial claims, especially in the Kashmir region. Now, all that leads us to a situation in which India, which has always been, a member of many different international organizations, founding member of the United Nations, but also regionally somewhat isolated because of the often conflictive relations with its neighbors. Pakistan, China, but to a lesser extent, Bangladesh, and even Nepal, with which there has, of course, been this sort of tug of war, the big neighbor syndrome, that we all know that a country which is too big cannot easily win friends among its smaller neighbors, because the smaller neighbors feel instinctively threatened and are always looking for allies elsewhere. So in this context, India, on the one hand, was suspicious of a wider Asian association in which it might have to defer to China, or in some cases to the United States, as at least it was in the past. And on the other hand, it also is trying to break out of this isolation, which deprives it of direct access, for example, to Central Asia and East Asia, because of Pakistan being, as it were, on the doorstep with regard to access to Iran, Central Asian countries, and Russia. So in that sense, India is almost, I would say, confined to the seas as far as its international network of relations. That is why the European Union was always seen as a strong potential partner by India, because there are no obvious political conflicts, there are no territorial issues, And there shouldn't be political differences because both India and the European Union are based on democratic constitutions and democratic electoral practices. However, in the time of the Congress Party rule in India, right until the 1990s, there was an issue of India being a largely state-controlled economy, or at least state-dominated economy, and being socialistic, even in its constitution since 1975. And also India being essentially living in autarky, having a few exports and imports. This changed with the reforms that were introduced in 91, 92, when India was going through a very difficult economic and financial situation. And the international trade has expanded. Growth also grew. Growth has become a lot faster. It reached 7 or 8% on certain years. And as a result, you saw an increase in the economic transactions. Now the EU is India's first economic partner, ahead of the US and China, not by much, but still by a little bit. And India is only about the 10th economic partners in terms of importance of the EU. Now, what the juncture nowadays is that India has refused last year to participate in the regional comprehensive economic partnership. This was mentioned by one of the earlier speakers. And on the other hand, the talks for a free trade union between India and the EU have been revived. In parallel, there is some discussion between India and the Eurasian Economic Union, led by Russia, to perhaps establish an agreement so that India could, in the near future, in some way, have closer partnerships with both the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union. That naturally would satisfy a number of objectives as far as India is concerned. But now the questions that arise, and I will deal with them very briefly, can be seen in that order. One, there is the US-EU and US-China relationship, which are increasingly problematic. And India, traditionally, I would say almost genetically, does not wish to choose. It wishes to remain in the middle, which is becoming increasingly difficult, as it is being pressured from various sides to join one side or the other, becoming either a sort of a military partner to the US and to NATO. There is a lot of talk now about NATO intruding in the Indian Ocean, and the United Kingdom is playing a big role in that. And in fact, that's where it brings me to the second point. You are looking at the one hand at the problematic issue with the United States, and on the other, you are dealing at the European Union and at the United Kingdom, which after breaking out of the European Union is now essentially playing the role of a rival. The UK is moving very fast to establish a series of agreements with India, which in a way would forestall similar agreements with the European Union. And of course, what the UK's vision is, Global Britain, is to restore in all its strength the Commonwealth. We all know that Boris Johnson is a great admirer of British Empire and feels that in some new way it can be revived. And therefore, English-speaking peoples, as Winston Churchill called them, could be together again. And India, up to a point, would qualify in terms of language, in terms of political and social culture, and in terms of history. Now, this is, of course, to be a big question, because on the one hand, you have East Asia, which is very fast coming together economically around China. On the other hand, you have an increasingly dynamic Eurasian community, which is increasingly becoming also including Iran. And on the other hand, you have readjustments in the Persian Gulf, the oil-producing region, with which India has increasingly close relations, because they need protection and they need support, and they do not believe the US can be relied upon. So in that sense, India, with a strong military power and proximity and a very, very major interest in oil and gas, can provide such a protective influence. So now we have to see what the next few years will bring about, because there are some major conflicts which are likely to happen. And there is no question that India has become a major industrial power in certain ways, and that it is bound, whether it takes another 5 years because of the current situation, it will become one of the 3 or 4 largest economies in the world. In terms of purchasing power parity, it's already among the 4 largest. But there are many problems which India is trying to solve, and I will only mention one, since there was some previous discussion about communication technology, cyber, the internet, the new, 5G and 6G generation, and even more basically about solid state electronics, about material sciences, and about semiconductors. We all know there is a global crisis in terms of production, and we all know that the US has become sort of unsafely dependent on certain Asian countries such as Taiwan. And on the other hand, we see that China is becoming ever more dominant in that sector. India, unfortunately, is left behind because it has not developed an autonomous production of semiconductors and all allied pieces of equipment, and therefore depends largely on imports. So now there is a big drive from the government of India to create a large national semiconductor and material science electronics complex. However, that will take time. In India, we all know that nothing moves quickly, generally, also because of the structure of the country. It is a federal republic. It defines itself as cooperative federal republic. The states have a lot of power. They can delay decisions, they can play their own games, and it's not easy for the central government to move things forward. We see that in the current pandemic situation, where the states were free to impose or not impose a number of restrictions or measures, and many of them probably did not quite do what they needed to do. So naturally, they will reject the fault on the state, on the central government, and the central government will blame them in return. But that does not, of course, solve the problems. So this was a very brief outline. I believe that one of the problems that the European Union should work to resolve, apart from, you might say, the technical and economic nitty-gritty, the differences that remain, is, of course, trying not to be ideological when there is no need for it. Because right now, the European Union, unfortunately, is trying to compete with the United States about moralistic preaching, especially the European Parliament, which probably doesn't have a lot of other powers, and therefore spends most of its time emitting opinions about things. And I honestly think that many of the critiques that have been leveled against India in a certain section of the European institutions are ill-founded and unfair. There are, of course, things that go wrong, and there are certain ideological differences. India defines itself now as a nationalistic state, which inherits a predominantly Hindu culture. And while respecting minorities, religious minorities, it sees its identity intimately tied to Hinduism and its, you might say, its offshoots, such as Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, etc., the so-called Indic religions. And in that sense, the European Union's insistence on complete separation between religion and the state, which, by the way, is not a uniform or a completely, let's say, it's not unanimity, it's not unanimous. There are differences between the countries in the EU which claim that the Christian heritage is fundamental and those which will not hear of it. As the case may be, a lot of criticism is being often is found in media on the grounds that in Europe, on the grounds that the Indian state is religiously chauvinistic and exploiting minorities, is anti-Islamic, etc., etc. And of course, that sermonizing does not help. And there has to be a dialogue, there has to be a sincere exchange of views, and criticism should not be avoided, but it certainly should not become the driving force in the bilateral relationship. As a result of that, to answer one of the questions that was raised, I think, by Ambassador Meyer, I should say that India often prefers to deal on a bilateral basis with member countries of the EU, with which it has strong relations, such as France, since most of the time, these European countries leave the moralizing to the Union and do their own business on purely pragmatic grounds. So naturally, it is more rewarding to talk business with one country which will not interfere in your affairs than with the European Union, which very often likes to pontificate. So I don't want to make any parallels with China here, because obviously we can see some of what happens between the EU and China. It's not to the same extent in India, but there is still a lot of that. And I think I would like to leave it at that, because it's a very wide topic, and I don't think obviously it could ever be covered. So I have just tried to give a few ideas and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Combs. Thank you for bringing us some information which is not so well known all over Europe. But India is a growing country, large population, and as we know from the slides of Yossi, India will become the most populated country in a very short time. So it is necessary to deal with India in Europe in any way. Who wants to raise questions? Timon? Do you want to? No. So if yeah,
I didn't think of a question. You called me. I wish India to recover from the pandemic crisis soon. I know the situation is I have some Indian friends, and I feel quite sorry for the country. Her questions, I'm pleased to hear that India is not taking sides between China and the US. Maybe I think of a question that the EU is announced to strengthen the cooperation with Indo-Pacific area. And how does India want to see this strategy? All right.
Thanks for the question, Com.
Yes, it's a very interesting question. Thank you. As you know, India already has some relations in the specific Indo-Indian Ocean region with France. Cooperation for security of navigation, safety of navigation, in the Indian Ocean, as France has a presence there because of the islands. That's still part of France, and therefore there has been an increasing cooperation. And India also has agreements with some of the countries that border the Indian Ocean in the Gulf as well as in East Africa. Now, as far as the current, I would say, proposal or the current, it is practically a project now for NATO forces to become more active in the Indian Ocean. That, of course, comes from the leadership of NATO, obviously, and it is seen as an attempt to make sure that other powers, you understand which powers I mean, do not become predominant in the Indian Ocean because of the so-called string of pearls strategy, etc., etc. So India sees this as a possible recourse to balance of power, but it is also somewhat reserved about the increasing presence of foreign navies of countries which do not have any physical presence in the Indian Ocean otherwise. For example, you probably have heard of the recent incident in which the US Navy conducted some naval exercises in the Indian exclusive economic zone near the Lakshadweep Islands. And what it did could have been sort of going under the radar, but they actually made a proclamation of it. They said, we believe in freedom of navigation, just to show that they were not being discriminatory between India and China. And therefore, just as we believe we have a right to send our ships wherever we want in the South China Sea. We will also send our ships whenever we want in the Indian Ocean. And there was even that statement, Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. So this was not well perceived by India, because there is an increasing feeling in New Delhi that the US administration of President Biden is not particularly friendly ideologically with India, at least with this government. And contrary to the to the Trump administration, which seemed to have a very strong bonhomie with India, the current administration has taken a very ideological tone. And we can see now some of the members of this administration who are openly attacking India for all sorts of things. So, I mean, let's face it, in a few words, the relation between India and the US is not going to be so cozy as is predicted by some of the optimists. There are going to be some serious differences, especially, for example, with regard to vaccines policy, with regard to a number of other issues. So, the idea of NATO becoming a sort of a permanent presence in the Indian Ocean is certainly not very well regarded from India, especially if the hostility with countries like Iran is not essentially reduced.
Okay, thank you. Unfortunately, no time for further questions because we are already close to the announced end time. So I call upon the next speaker, Gonche Tasmini, talking about Europe and Iran. Gonche, thank you very much for joining us. You have the floor.
Hello. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, fine.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay, great. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. Many thanks for this kind invitation to participate on today's panel, and thanks to my co-panelists for their fascinating presentations. So today I promised to present some perspectives in relation to Europe's role in reviving the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, what we commonly refer to as a nuclear deal. This was a successful multilateral non-proliferation agreement between Iran and the P5+1, France, UK, Germany, the US, China, and Russia. Now, today, Europe's main focus has been to save the JCPOA, with talks having resumed in Vienna between Iran and the world powers. While there are many complicating factors, I believe that Europe can play a central role in helping to disentangle the nuclear dossier. Now, Europe's role in the nuclear deal, it's been a bittersweet story. It's a story of pride turned into frustration, and then again into renewed hope. And the story of Europe and Iran's nuclear deal, I think, can be divided into two phases. The first is characterized by perseverance and success, characterized by conflict prevention and consensus building. Just roughly between 2003 and 2015, Europe played a very important role in facilitating US-Iran nuclear diplomacy. It invested considerable political and diplomatic capital in making the deal come to life in July 2015. Now, the second chapter is characterized by frustration and powerlessness, and this inability to influence former Trump administration, who had subordinated the goal of non-proliferation and re-engagement to its ideological political clash with Iran. Trump squandered years of diplomatic efforts by unilaterally withdrawing from the deal in May 2018, ending compliance and subsequently reimposing draconian sanctions against Iran, despite the IAEA's verification and confirmation that Iran had fully complied with the deal. Now, the White House proceeded to enforce its maximum pressure campaign to force Iran to agree to a new and expanded deal. Tehran continued compliance with the JCPOA for a year in response to European promises that they would keep their part of the agreement. However, Europe could not deliver to Iran what it had pledged in the JCPOA, as Trump coerced EU companies to abide by US rather than European legislation, and spurned attempts at mediation. Now, since November 2019, Tehran has been progressively exceeding the limits of the nuclear pact as a protest to Trump-era sanctions, and it has recently accelerated its breaches of the deal. The nuclear deal sets a limit of 3.67% enrichment purity, suitable for producing civilian and non-military nuclear energy, and far below the 90% that is weapons grade. Iran resumed 20% enrichment in April this year, and just recently, Reuters, I think, announced that it was enriching up to 60%, and Iran has actually acknowledged publicly that it would begin enriching uranium to 60%. Now, this followed a law that was enacted by what is now a hardline-dominated parliament following the breakdown of the deal, a law that is titled the Strategic Action to Lift the Sanctions and Protect the Interests of the Iranian Nation. And this act called for ending Iran's voluntary implementation of the additional protocol and other steps to restrict IAEA access. In this second phase, in this second chapter of this nuclear saga, the E3, the EU, have failed or fallen short of replicating their past successes and mediating the conflict and preventing these breaches or non-compliance on both sides. The inability to protect EU companies from US extraterritorial sanctions and the eventual failure of INSTEX greatly diminished Europe's status in Iran. To Iran, Europe's role as an international security player was seen as groundless, and Europe was seen as weak and vulnerable to US pressure. However, dismissing Europe's efforts as ineffectual is inaccurate. The fact is that the E3 and the EU have managed to avoid the complete breakdown of the deal for 3 years, keeping the structure of possible re-engagement between the US and Iran in place. And there's something to be said about that. For the US, the nuclear deal, which still exists formally, thanks to Europe, is the only framework available for re-engaging Iran in nuclear diplomacy. And thanks to the E3 and EU, Biden can still rely on the bridge of the JCPOA to possibly re-engage Iran. Now I'm suggesting a third chapter, a final chapter in Europe's role in the nuclear standoff. Now, while the nuclear deals cast Europe as sort of a second-tier security player, it doesn't mean that it is an ineffective one. The EU might not be able to control events and developments, but it does have influence and perseverance, and this shouldn't be underestimated when it comes to re-engaging Iran. Now, indirect talks have resumed between the US and Iran, with Europe holding the key to a successful outcome. I think that Europe has to consider best how to advance its broader interests as a stakeholder in this process, while serving as a bridge between the US and Iran. Now, while national interests often collide and there are conflicting or diverging policies that have emerged among the EU states, there are different preferences or tactical approaches when it comes to engaging Iran or dealing with Iran. Collectively, Europe shares normative security and strategic interests when it comes to Iran and the JCPOA, survival of the non-proliferation regime, the strengthening of the authority of multilateral verification bodies, preventing generalized regional conflict that may have potentially spillover effects in Europe, regaining access to Iran's market, especially the lucrative energy field, and also creating an environment more conducive to political dialogue with Tehran on a range of issues. Now, the fourth set of indirect talks between the US and Iran opened in Vienna on Friday last week. Iran has refused to hold direct talks with the US until it has returned to the deal. And so these discussions are brokered by the EU and the powers in the deal. The EU seeks US re-entry after Trump's withdrawal, the lifting of American sanctions, and Iran's return to full compliance. Now, for principled reasons, Iran has categorically rejected demands for a new deal or any changes to the terms of the existing JCPOA. Tehran is unlikely to make concessions, given the deep mistrust that Washington's unilateral withdrawal has created. The other issue is by allowing the US back into the JCPOA, it allows, or it entails, giving Washington the power to snap back all international sanctions in the future, possibly as soon as 2025, when there may be yet a new president in the White House. Tehran has also dismissed US preconditions, saying that Tehran, not Washington, is in a strong legal and moral position to demand that sanctions be lifted first, because the US was a party that pulled out of the JCPOA and ceased performing its commitments under the deal in the first place. Tehran has insisted all along that it will reply to full compliance if the US fulfills its obligations under Resolution 2231, which endorsed the JCPOA and lifts the sanctions first. Now, in Tehran, the hardliner principlist narrative of the West's duplicity has gained traction since US withdrawal from the deal. The Iranian political elite in general now agree that Iran should not allow itself to be sort of duped by the US again, and that Tehran should not reverse any steps any steps that is taken out of compliance or essentially non-compliance until Washington is certain to ease sanctions. So this makes it very difficult for moderates to negotiate or to maneuver. It's also believed that the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei may not want a major breakthrough in the Vienna talks, which could give an advantage to more moderate-leaning candidates in the presidential race that is due on the 18th of June this year. So I'll finish off with a question. What can the E3, the EU, do to help both parties find a viable path back to the agreement? Now, European leaders should use their strategic position as a go-between, but they need to present a more united front, a more unified approach, and a more generally assertive policy in resuscitating the deal. The E3 EU's mediation effort must re-establish trust between the US and Iran immediately, not least because the IAEA recently reported that Iran has been producing small quantities of uranium metal, a vital element for manufacturing warheads. So Iran's nuclear advances kind of adds to the pressure and adds this urgency to the stalemate. So I think one of the first imperatives for the E3 and the EU is to have all parties focus on rehabilitating the JCPOA. Now, although the US and Iran's regional adversaries would like to see the current agreement expanded to curb Iran's missile development program and for Iran to scale back on its regional activities, the focus, I believe, should be maintaining the current format and restoring the deal. Because it's highly unlikely that the US and Europe will be able to strike a broader agreement with Iran unless they first rejoin the original JCPOA, either the current or under either the current or the next government in Tehran. The longer the US takes to rejoin the JCPOA, the greater the support in Tehran for accelerating the Iranian nuclear program. In the coming weeks, European efforts should focus on a swift return to the JCPOA rather than holding out for the unlikely prospect of a new nuclear formula with Iran. Now, Iran's seeking compensation for the economic hardships resulting from America's reimposition of sanctions. I don't think this should obstruct current efforts, but Europe could expedite and add additional humanitarian or pandemic relief to Iran's recently approved loan requests to the IMF as a confidence building measure. Europeans could press all partners on the delivery of humanitarian aid by boosting the now clearly, well, near defunct INSTEX trade channel. As a goodwill gesture, the EU should press for waivers to allow oil sales, and they should explore avenues for regional de-escalation by considering even broader talks, not about just Iran's nuclear program, but about the security concerns that all sides have. Everything from missiles, militias, to drones and domestic unrest. It is in Europe's direct interest to have open trade with Iran, and it would show Iran that no matter what the US does, if Iran abides by the agreement, they will continue to benefit from an economic partnership with the E3 and the EU. Europeans should channel their frustration over Iran's diversion from the JCPOA into concrete demands and timelines for a sequenced return to full compliance by all signatories. And in this context, it would boost or bolster the EU's role as a neutral mediator to remind Washington of the need to make the first move, having withdrawn from the agreement. I'll finish off by saying that for 4 years, the EU and its member states have showed remarkable backbone in their determination to uphold the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran, even if they have not managed to keep the agreement fully alive. Now, partly as a result of the breakdown of the deal and the strained relations with Europe, Iran's increasingly looking eastward towards Russia, towards China, to diversify following the breakdown of the deal, which gives it a sort of economic and political cloud by allowing it to broaden its political spectrum. So I think that Europe cannot lose or miss out on Iran. I think it needs to give one last-ditch effort with the same energy, the same perseverance and foresightedness it had to resuscitate this historical deal and bolster its long-standing ties with Iran and hopefully begin a new chapter of interaction and cooperation. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gonche. I think everybody here is thanking you for this very serious analysis of the situation, and everybody would like to see the rehabilitation of the deal with Iran, besides the economic advantages which would be there between Iran and Europe. Of course, we are interested, but we're also interested in working of the deal, and I hope you're right that the actors are on the right way to do so. Questions, comments? I think that shows that everybody agreed.
I'm happy to hear that.
Thank you for being here. So I was told that Patrick would come in once again with a short presentation. Patrick, are you here?
Thank you. Yes, I in fact would like to come in with a brief presentation, conscious of the time, but also conscious of, I think, as you said, the value of bringing less known perspective on key issues into this discussion. And my topic was titled Migration, but actually what I'd like to frame is that Europe and the world are essentially getting it wrong on migration today, and with huge, likely detrimental consequences for not just the future of Europe, but the future period for Europe. And that applies to the rest of the world. And I could, if time permits, add a comment or two about the challenges for countries like China, Iran, Israel, and others that have been featured. But what I'd like to do is just share a little bit of an overview and then intersect with a discussion about Europe and its role in the world and in the future. And I would start by saying that I think what is essential to understand, but largely not understood, is that migration today is essentially and primarily internationalized, but not globalized, labor and skills mobility. And that it is particularly crucial for the survival, the economic survival of Europe, when one looks at the fact that today about 20% of the workforces of most Western European countries, and here I would refer to what used to be called the EU15, are comprised, if not by migrants or foreign-born alone, by migrants and first generation, as they call children of migrants. And I think given the presence of a few of you in Austria, I'd like to cite, again, less known perspective, which is simply to say that today, 50% of the population of what could be called quintessentially Austrian Vienna is comprised of people who are either foreign born or have one or both parents who are foreign born. And if you look across the metropolises of Europe, and particularly cities like Marseille, London, Brussels, and a few others, you'll see that the count of population and proportionately then of the workforce are similarly high or even higher. I think the foreign-born population in Brussels region is even higher than 50%. But what is essential to underline is that with changing demographics, changing technologies and application of technologies, the offshoring of labor-intensive production, but the expansion of labor-intensive services as essential portions or components of European economies. The need for labor and skills essentially is more than what is derived from population, and now not just population, but population decline. And here, Wing, if you permit me, I'll make an analogy with China, because certainly the US press has featured the latest demographic projections from China, which indicate that the birth rate and the population growth of China have slowed even further in the latest calculations. And if we look at that in terms of what that means for China's economy, the projections are that within the next 20 to 30 years, the workforce, the working age population of China will shrink by at least 15%. And you don't lose 15% of your workforce without huge consequences. Now, I note from having been in dialogue with Chinese officials as long as 20 or so years ago, that there's been a very keen appreciation of that. And one of the strategic approaches in China's case has been to increasingly offshore labor-intensive production, particularly to Southeast Asia, Vietnam and Cambodia, for example. And at the same time, other countries facing demographic aging and decline have less possibilities immediately to offshore, for example, services, meaning that countries are today significantly dependent on mobility from abroad or mobility from within economic communities. I might note when one speaks of the fact that about 7% or so of the European Union population is foreign-born, migrant by definition. Close to half of that number is comprised of people from other EU member countries. But more importantly, the focus on migration in Europe has illustrated or illuminated the dilemma that Europe faces in having declining and aging populations, and particularly workforces, in every single EU member country and the former United Kingdom, and similar phenomena in many of the neighboring countries to the east. Again, to touch on another country represented here, I will note that the figures, and having done some work in a particular context, of the Russian Federation, the Russian workforce has lost about 12 million people in its workforce since the year 2000. And there is almost a mathematical parity in the fact that the estimates, current estimates of the number of foreign-born in the Russian Federation, and the number of so-called migrants, a very large proportion of whom are economically active, is around 11 million. So one can see very dramatically there that a very large part of migration to the Russian Federation is essentially corresponding to, if not driven by, substitution of departures from the workforce due primarily to aging, with an increasingly smaller number of young people entering the workforce due to a very low birth rate. But again, to give another example of the population workforce migration dilemma, I like to cite how Korean demographers described the challenge that South Korea and in fact North Korea with very similar demographics face, which is they noted that according to the current fertility rate, the fertility rate being the average number of children born to a woman in a society, and with a number of 2.1 average children needing to be born per woman across a society, a country, or whatever, simply to replace the population, an increasing number of countries are facing what the Korean demographers facetiously, but not so facetiously, characterized as, if the Korean fertility rate remains what it is today, the Korean population will be extinct in about 700 years. And I just note that the fertility rate for Korea is in the neighborhood of 1.5, I think, or 1.6, which is very similar to fertility rates in Spain, Italy, and a number of other Western European countries, and in fact, fairly close to the fertility rate in Russia. Again, what I'm throwing out in terms of some data and the connection with economy and workforce comes back to the point that I noted earlier, that Europe, for its own survival, at least politically, seems to be getting it wrong on migration in throwing up both rhetoric and practices of becoming increasingly restrictive and therefore increasingly unattractive for the migration it needs, for the immigration it needs, not only of skilled, but of less skilled people. And it should be noted that a lot of the agriculture that feeds Europe, for example, the agricultural basin of southern Italy, that basically is entire Europe's breadbasket, particularly in winter months, depends on Moroccan and workers from other places in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's very much the case in central and southern Italy, in the Bouches du Rhône agricultural region of France, and I can go on, including where I'm located, which is next to Switzerland, whose important wine producing industry can only function on the basis, at least of tens of thousands of seasonal workers who come in over the growing season, present primarily from Southern Europe and from Balkan countries, as well as from Romania and Bulgaria. But let me come back to the dilemma, which is not the dilemma that European politicians think it faces of being overwhelmed, but the risk is growing that Europe will be underwhelmed in simply not being able to obtain and recruit the people it needs to maintain its economy, even as there will be some degree of increased automation and computerization in both production and services. And the challenge that comes on in the intersection with the agenda before ISIS is that this is no small or anodyne matter, because if we look at, as I just noted, situations elsewhere around the world, where an increasing number, in fact, more than half of all the countries of the world are today in a situation of zero or negative growth fertility rates, and therefore, if not now, looking in the near future, of facing skills and labor shortages. The challenge is highlighted by what's happening at present with COVID. And I can just give one most recent example I came up with, which is a cry of alarm in the Singapore press, Singapore being a dynamic economy, but an economy that depends primarily on migrant workers for significant portions of the economy, particularly construction, as well as services, commerce, and so on. The cry of alarm is that because of the COVID pandemic, workers that would formerly come either on short-term or seasonal basis, or even on longer term from many of the surrounding countries, are blocked. And what the construction industry has just said to the government is, we're now in a situation where our main infrastructure and commercial construction projects are delayed. And they're not delayed by a few weeks or months. They're saying our delay is looking at a year and a half behind. And I need only then contrast that with the challenges that Europe faced in the lockdown and the border closures following the first wave of the COVID pandemic, in which borders are closed. Within a few weeks, the European administrators, the European Parliament and others had said, we have to find a way of maintaining borders open for essential workers and for seasonal workers. And the word was essentially from the agricultural industry across Europe that if we don't have the temporary workers that we need every year, whether it's from Romania in Spain or from Turkey or elsewhere, we are going to face an absence of adequate agricultural production even to feed our own population. And that was here in Europe. Very quickly, just one vignette that was characteristic was here in Switzerland. Essentially what the Swiss government did is arranged with the Romanian government and the governments in between to put Romanian seasonal workers on buses in Bucharest and move them across through closed borders to the agricultural regions around Switzerland that were waiting for them to do the planting in the spring last year. That meant we had enough food in Switzerland the rest of the year. And similarly, that happened around Europe. It also happened under similar circumstances in Canada and elsewhere. Just to underline the importance of taking this into account and taking the question of what are needed in terms of the, if you will, factors of production, labor, and skills to maintain economies, and in fact, as well to look ahead to the possibility to continue providing for economic growth and growth of productivity, which are interlinked with the skills and labor force competences in any economy, and along with that, linked with the fact that few countries today can train the range and breadth of skills that every individual economy needs in order to be both productive for internal consumption and especially for integrated economies to be able to compete in an increasingly globalized market economy. I think I'll leave it at that. Given the time, I have a much more detailed paper that I will share through one of the coordinators, perhaps with Vladimir Kulikov. I can send him an updated version of the paper that he or Walter can share with all of you here, and that would certainly be part of my contribution to the ICES compendium that will come back from this. But I'll leave it at that. It's kind of a just snapshot overview of some of the issues that migration intersects with the future of Europe and Europe's relationship with the rest of the world, and in fact the relationship of some other countries that have been evoked today with the world. And perhaps, Walter, we have a few moments for questions and answers if I've managed to provoke someone to either question or challenge my introduction.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Was interesting. There are facts and figures which are widely known, but the impact of that are widely ignored. That's, I think, was very, very clear in your presentation. Benjamin has a question already.
Yeah, no, I don't have a question, I have a comment. Thank you for a very interesting numbers and figures. Patrick said Europe gets it wrong. I think you can't put it that way because there is no European opinion on migration. I followed the discussion in France, and they are drifting towards a political civil war. And some even mention officers who speak of a military civil war. So I think there are very clear facts, but people draw totally different conclusions. And I think if you mention the facts, you cannot only say you have to interpret it one way. There are certainly different ways to interpret them. Thank you.
Thanks. Patrick, you want to react?
Yeah, let me welcome the comment that there isn't a unified European view or interpretation. And in fact, I alluded to that in talking about how very often the practices are very distinct from what the rhetoric would suggest the policy options are. And you raised the French question, and I like to then highlight that also the French take on this has been to maintain over the last decade a rolling regularization program that since a decade ago has allowed migrants who arrived or ended up in irregular status to get residency, numbering in the hundreds of thousands, basically through a program that if they were employed and their employers and in some cases their trade union showed they were employed and contributing, that they would be provided an option to regularize their status and be able to work legally. And you had, of course, a regularization program 2007, 2008 in Spain that at the same time, a lot of complaints about who some of the migrants might be and their impact on Spain. You had about 700,000 people in Spain who benefited from regularization. And again, largely through establishing that they were working and the government itself was interested in regularizing them because from one year to the next, that regularization put the national social security accounts from the red back to black again, because all of a sudden there were 700,000 new contributors to their social security accounts. Just an example, but again, yes, Wendelin, there are many different interpretations, but I think in terms of the future of Europe, one needs to give a certain attention, if not priority, to economic and social factors, not just political agendas.
Thank you.
Okay,
Walter.
thank you.
Walter, just one sentence. You're very right. There's certainly a rational answer to everything you said and an emotional. And I think the rational answer is sometimes quite different from the emotional.
Okay. Yeah, but there's the cultural aspect too of migration, and there are different groups, and as we can see, there are different groups after migration for integration or not integration. Okay, so the time has come to an end of the conference. I thank you very much. Andre, could you sum up to some extent what we discussed in 2 afternoon sessions?
Thank you, Walter. You know, each public event comes to a point at which it matters no longer what the next speaker has to say. The only thing which really matters is how long he or she is going to talk for. I guess that we have reached this point, so I'll try to be very concise and to share with you some of my takeaways out of our two-day event. I think that it is clear that Europe will have to operate in a very diverse world, and the world which will have both postmodern, modern, and traditional paradigms at the same time. And it's tempting to say that the developed North will live in the postmodern paradigm, and the developing South will get stuck between the traditional paradigm and the modern paradigm. But it's not really the case, because we see that the North penetrates the South. And when we discussed, for example, modern telecommunications, definitely we should keep in mind that there are many more mobile phones in Africa these days than it is in Europe. And definitely some of people, especially the younger generation of South Asia, is very advanced in using new technologies. So we will have a blend of various paradigms coexisting, overlapping for a long period of time. Definitely, it's not something that will change within the next couple of years, and that makes the European position in the world somewhat controversial and difficult. Second, it is also apparent that we will have a system without an unquestionable hegemonic power in charge of providing global commons. It is still an open question to what extent Biden might try to restore the US leadership, at least in the Western world. It's yet to be seen to what extent he should or could take into account the limitations of the American power. But it seems apparent that the days of the Pax Americana are already behind us, and they will not come back, at least in any foreseeable future. At the same time, as we heard today, and also at the first session, there are no volunteers to replace the United States as the unquestionable hegemonic power. China is not willing, and right now it has certain limitations in terms of its capacities. India is still maturing, and clear enough, it will take time for India to mature and to enhance its leadership ambitions in the world. So definitely it will be a very different system from what it was 20 years ago during the unipolar moment. It will be different from the bipolar world of the Cold War. And Europe has to operate in this quite different environment. Finally, it's also clear that with all the accomplishments of Europe notwithstanding, Europe will get smaller. Not because it will get necessarily weaker, but it will get smaller because other international players are likely to rise faster. So probably it would be fair to say that there'll be more world in Europe and less Europe in the world. Still, Europe remains indispensable, and I think that a lot will depend on whether Europe can deal with a couple of strategic challenges that it faces. Some of these challenges we discussed today. Let me summarize some of these challenges in a very brief way. I will just give you a laundry list of them as it is seen from outside of the European Union. I think that one of the apparent challenges is the challenge of reaching strategic autonomy. Again, there is a lot of talk in Europe about the need to provide for strategic autonomy. At the same time, we see that this rhetoric is not always converted into specific actions. Moreover, the accession of the Biden administration in Washington, D.C., quite often interpreted in Europe as an excuse not to push for the strategic autonomy too hard. And of course, that means that in view of the growing tensions between Washington and Beijing, the European Union might become a hostage to this bipolar momentum, and it will have basically to abide by the rules which will be developed in the United States, and it will consolidate against China under the US leadership. So strategic autonomy remains an important challenge. If you look at the economic and technological side, I think that the challenge for the European Union is the decline of the economic and technological competitiveness. Though nobody would deny that Europe has significant economic and also R&D capacity, the European Union today is lagging behind in many key areas of the technological development behind the North American states and East Asian states. If this gap is going to increase, the European Union might gradually turn into an industrial museum of the world, which will mean marginalization in the global economic and technological development. Moreover, one should also keep in mind that given the traditional specificities of the European social state, the European labor remains very expensive, maybe too expensive for successful competition in global markets. And if we look at the professional and geographical mobility of the European labor, basically it is relatively low compared to other centers of economic and technological growth. Definitely, it is a serious challenge because it questions the validity of the European social and economic model. Now, another challenge that, in my view, we should keep in mind is the question of the European integrity. And many underscore real or potential divisions within the European Union between the old Europe and the new Europe, between the south and the north of the continent, between bigger states and smaller states, between donors and recipients of the EU funds. And of course, the the departure of the United Kingdom from the European Union aggravated this problem because it disrupted the very fragile and very delicate balance within the European Union, which existed for a couple of decades. So national identity is back, and sometimes it pushes the European identity to the margins. Though nobody believes in a collapse of the European Union, some predict renationalization of a number of all European functions and the empowerment of nation states at the expense of not of supranational bodies of the European Union. The European isolationism, the threat of European isolationism is still there. I think that it is partially related to the specific features of the decision making within the European Union. And for European nations, it is very difficult to reach an agreement on some of the most burning international issues, even issues like the Kosovo independence or Venezuela or Israeli-Palestinian conflicts are divisive within the European Union. And if these inward priorities of the European Union take the upper hand, I think that definitely the role of the European Union in the production of the global commons is likely to decrease. And it means that the rules of the game will be written by someone else, not by the European Union, not by Brussels. And finally, I don't want to dwell on that in detail, but of course, the demographic decline of many European nations and a potential new migration crisis might constitute a formidable existential challenge to the European Union. And let me say that I don't want to repeat what Patrick has just said. I'd like only to emphasize that it is also an issue of the European identity. And it's an issue not only of the labor market, but also of adaptation and integration of growing diasporas coming from Middle East and especially from Africa. My take is that so far we do not have solutions, neither in Europe nor anywhere else. But in Europe, they tried a whole variety of different adaptation and integration models, ranging from very liberal British multiculturalism to much more rigid assimilation approach practiced by France. I think that we don't see too many success stories. And definitely it is a challenge. I would also say that in terms of the labor implications, maybe the demand on labor will go down in Europe if there are ways to automate some of the services in the European Union. But the supplied side and the pressure from the supplied side will increase. So let me say that, of course, all of us, at least all of us sitting here, wish Europe well. I think that the success of European project is important, not just for the European Union itself, but it is important for neighboring countries. Europe remains to a large extent a symbol of modernity, despite all the problems that it has. It is also a symbol of stability in the volatile international environment. I think that there is a lot of sympathy towards Europe all over the place, and that there are expectations that Europe will remain not just a deal taker, but also a deal maker on very important international issues, especially on issues that can be labeled as global commons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei, and thank you for your summing up. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank also the Russian International Affairs Council. You are the Director General of for the cooperation and for the partnership we have entered into. I think it's very helpful for our work. This conference, which would have deserved a much larger audience, was a kind of practice round of our project. Cooperation of scientists, researchers, to enter into a dialogue independently, not committed to any external power, but only committed to the dialogue and discussion of ideas and of thoughts. And it's not coincidence when Jens Wendland referred to the World Public Forum Dialogue of Civilizations. I think many of our friends are still committed to the legacy of the World Public Forum. This conference and the summing up by Andrei Kortunov will give us food for thought for further activities. And we will meet in the same or similar format again, and I hope we can do that. Thank you very much for cooperation. May I ask Vladimir Kurikov, are there any technical aspects you want to talk to us?
Okay, so we will work a bit with the video because we have recorded both days and put it on the website. At least we have some understanding with Andrei and Moscow State University, whatever happens, and we have the funding to make a compendium and publish a compendium of papers in classic form. So since Europe is a symbol of modernity, so let's print a book. It's I mean, for me it's much more interesting, and this is not the end, and hopefully well, as you know, presenting a good book to good people sometimes bring additional interest and all that, because videos are great. Students are busy, but we have to also think of how to push the institute's, let's say, ability to research. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you, all of you, once again. Hope to see you soon again, and hope that we can also meet physically in the future, not only virtually. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Take care. Hope to see you in Rhodes.
Yeah. I would say the Rhodes is now everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes.
In Switzerland, in Lisbon, in Shanghai,
And in Moscow.
Moscow, in Vienna, Berlin.
Yeah, so it's
The spirit of Rhodes is there.
Mhm.
it's an additive technology.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. If there is nothing else, I would leave, okay? Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay.
Thanks.